Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto falls in love with Mimosa Vermillion? Movie 1. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and also make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, gabzoroberto, and support him for writing this awesome fanfic. Link is in the description. Let's start the story. A thick fog blanketed the moss-covered ground, surviving defiantly in the face of its sunlight nemesis in the sky. But what one could truly notice about this fog, was that it was more magical in nature, than was natural, as it didn't seem to spread out, nor was it lifting under the midday sun. Instead it seemed to just dance around the area it was in, as if content with the current surroundings, and had no intention of leaving. Silent, as it slowly creaked along the plush surface of the ground, and brushed against the damp moss that seemed to sparkle in the dew that survived, and was twinkling in what little of the sun's rays were allowed to penetrate the dew's protector, only hindered by the white fabric that would interrupt its mindless nature. The bright near-blinding light that it gained from reflecting the sun's attempt to dissipate it, only darkening in a spot where a shadowy silhouette of the bring draped in a new white robe, that stood lazily in the fog, staring out of it to a great hill, or was it a mountain in the far distance, upon which a great city sat comfortably and perfectly, as if it was the location that grew up around the city, and not the other way around. Towers and spires could be seen lifting into the air, with the shining spike of the many buildings looking like spears rising up to greet the new day's sun. Its opulence and grandeur is apparent even from this distance, standing out amongst the low-lying tilled land around it, as if demanding that the world look at it, and try to deny its right, as one of the greatest cities in the known continent. The being itself was something that at first glance would have had even the most powerful of wizards feel fear in their hearts, with lesser ones running in fear from its presence, as if you were to stand near it, you could feel the great amount of anger and hatred roll off its form like agitated waves crashing against a lonely shore, creating a more suffocating atmosphere than the very fog that surrounded it. Its eyes gave off a blazing red near orange glow, more in the shade of an angry sunrise, than a blood-like color most would believe it should match, and so intense its focus was on the city in the distance, that if possible, it would be rendered to would combust under the pressure. Draped over his shoulder, and held in a fine silk band was thick lush red hair, winding down to the calmly rising chest of the being to whom it belonged. Its face a terrifying beauty, as the sun mixed with the being's presence, only enhanced its already vivid details, and gave it an almost god-like appearance with not a single blemish or feature out of place, with its thin ruby lips under a sharp nose, that led to a slightly pointed chin, all on a near pale white celestial skin, that basked in the sun's rays. The white kimono that hugged its form was decorated with red swirls, and flowers that could be identified as fire lilies wrapping around slender, but well-maintained, and perfected body opening at the top slightly to allow for a slight peak at a chest area that would make most females jealous, and halt most men in their tracks. The now identified female being had one more trait that would make it impossible to identify it as a human event in its current form, and that was its 9 large proudly displayed and well-groomed tails that flowed out from behind, its form each one easily the length of the female's body, and tipped with white fur. They were fanned out behind her swing gently in the light breeze, while being held up to give her form an almost peacock-like appearance by this very act, as the very thought of one of her most prized and beloved features, even having the chance of touching the ground, would send waves of disgust and denial, though her not only her mind, but her very being, as well. In her deceivingly delicate hand, she clutched protectively a glass cube that contained a gold haze with a dense center that was moving lazily around its confines, as if not worried for its current predicament. Her powerful claws retracted to make sure it didn't damage the container, even if she knew it would take a far greater power to even scratch the glass, let alone break it. Her other hand rested on the hilt of a katana, the blade of which sprung out from the maw of a fox-shaped head handle, which had 9 red tassels on its base, and red gems for its eyes. The blade itself had an array of strange symbols that were arrayed across its razor-sharp edge, and on the flat side an image of a great 9-tailed fox running across the length of the blade, whose tails made it look like it had sprung out of the maw of the fog-headed handle. Kaki stood on the soft ground staring in the distance at the city, inspecting its inhabitants both physically and magically, as if staring at an insect, and determining if it was worth the effort to stand on or not. For while no normal or even magical creature, be they human, elf, demon or even devil to some extent, could ever hope to see anything for where she was standing, Kaki was decidedly, and proudly not in that category, as indicated by not only her ethereal appearance she gave off, but also in her ability to not only see the city with near-perfect accuracy at such a distance, but also feel nearly all the energy around her, both magical as well as emotional. Such an ability was starting to create some doubt in her mind as to the plan she had originally formed, and was leading her opinion to form a new plan, one less likely to cause larger problems and more complication for her goals down the line. The suffering she felt, along with the surprising amount of indifference that these humans showed to others of their own race based solely on riches and station, was enough to make her want to snuff out life in the land she stood in. But she knew she couldn't go through with that thought, as she had learned long ago that when threatened, even with other options, humans fought with a great amount of tenacity and surprising power, being able to pull some of the most surprising results and techniques out of only the gods know where to protect themselves, even if it that the unwanted side effect of allowing the part of their species they detested survive, as well. No, if change was to happen it needed to be like a slow-moving medicine, introduced to the body in slow and incremental amounts so as to ever so slowly, but effectively mend the rifts and division in humanity, while never alerting the ever-skeptical race to just how much change was happening and where it was originating from. That being said, the power levels that these humans showed were in some ways quite varying, with the power levels of humans in the city on the hill much greater than many of the humans in the lower-lying land. This being due to the so-called royalty and nobility having far greater reserves of power in general than those outside of it, evidently from breeding with each other, and a once-in-a-while injection of new untainted energy into the blood pool by those who showed potential of benefiting the upper echelons of the society. But in the long run Kaki knew that power could only amount to so much, and was only one part of the formula that made up the ultimate goal of nearly all beings, which was greatness, as brains, along with the willingness to go beyond one's potential, and the bonds one forms with others were also needed in order to drive one to the ultimate goal. For one cannot truly be great without the will to do so, the knowledge to make it so, the power to get them there, and the bonds to acknowledge and fuel the drive to achieve better. These traits not only needed to be present in the being, but also needed to be nurtured, as there was no hope in one being able to make it to greatness without an abundance of all four. It essentially needs to be the perfect blend of what happens when nature and nurture combine and work together. And from what she can feel from where she stood, there were very few humans that possessed even half of these traits, let alone all four in the quantities needed to achieve what truly mattered. She knew that if her plan was to succeed, then all these traits must be ingrained in her charge, and then cultivated, and that once completed the finished result would not only be a land, but also a being that could not only stand the test of time and all its consequences, but also shine brighter than ever before, and be a beacon for others to aspire to, for them to take up the light, and keep it going, and make a better world than they arrived in, all the while giving her charge the recognition and praise they deserved. Closing her eyes for a brief second, she could still remember what had driven her down this path to this plan, for better or for worse. Flashback, she could feel her prison shaking, and see the lights darkening, here, as the once calm water that lay at base of her prison bars surged forward, and backwards, as if in the presence of a hurricane, violently roaring, as it smashed against the bars, and taste the pain and anguish in the air around her. The cause of this great calamity in her mind was multiple factors, one of them being her very emotions at the time, which were a mixture of both fear and a great anger. Fear of what happens after the lights finally went out, and her prison and world becomes black, anger at the foolish and disgusting insects that were the main cause of this calamity. But maybe insects was the wrong label to use on them. Yes, monsters was probably a better term, for what else could you use to describe a mob of humans that would hunt one of their own young down and burn them alive? And all the while during this great atrocity they were singing and dancing around the fire, while some would be throwing more fuel on it. Her disgust and anger growing even larger when she noticed that among their numbers were those sworn to protect the peace, and those in need, shinobi laughing and chatting away, as if it was a barbecue, and all they were doing was having some drinks while their food cooked, as if in reality it was not a small child who was slowly being cooked alive. Never before had she felt such anger and hatred for humans, not even when under the control of that damned pink-eye freak or first sealed away by the tree-happy weirdo. Never before has she felt such shame at her powerlessness to help the one true innocent party in all this, but also anger at herself for adding to their suffering by intentionally sending her host nightmares, and depriving them of sleep in some sick way of getting revenge for the years of imprisonment she had to go through, and the years yet left to complete. No, the true despair and anger came at the unintended effects that her warden had for holding her, and what it was causing now. To most the benefit of increased healing and strong body that came with being a part of an illustrious bloodline like the Uzumakis, with the effects being further increased due to the regenerative abilities of her chakra and powers, would be a godsend, and would in truth make someone very hard to kill. But in this case it was the greatest of curses, for as the child burnt, he regenerated his burnt skin, and any lost blood would also be recreated, muscles would heal, and eyes would regrow after being melted, only to burn all over again, as the fire he was in was kept going. So long as she had chakra, and the seal kept working and sapping it away, her host would undergo the most twisted version of a phoenix rebirth ever. She could feel the pain and the hopelessness of her warden, feel how light that had once resisted all other darknesses was now starting to dim from the onslaught of pain mixed with hopelessness and despair, and how the soul was slowly starting to go insane from all the strain that it was being put under. She wanted nothing more now than for the child to die, and to no longer have to wither away in front of her from its traumatizing experiences, and would even consider letting these tormentors have a quick death if they provided it. But she knew that would never happen, as the hatred of these monsters was too great, and their sick intent too driven to even generate that idea, let alone play with it. See what you have wrought, Yondaime Hokage. You have successfully saved this cesspool of inhumanity, and murdered the light. I hope you suffer for eternity in the death god's stomach, for even then it would not be enough to match the pain your son feels. Now raged Kaki internally, as she started to slam herself against the gates of the prison, hoping against hope that something would happen. But like usual, her request went unanswered. Soon the inevitable happened, as it always does to those who can no longer stand the hatred that they feel, and a great sorrow took its place with pain, as its ever-familiar companion. Hearing the screams of the victim, and the laughs of the victors, made her start to question her own purpose for the first time in a millennia. What is the point in having great power if I'm unable to use it? I was charged with preventing the dark side, this dark side of humanity, from taking over, but I became so immersed in their dark energies, that I gave into my own hate. Madara's nature drove me even further, and the enslavement of my siblings drove me off the proverbial cliff, and now because I failed to prevent myself from falling to such a weak emotion, a child is being tortured in front of me. Is this my punishment? Am I to stand vigil throughout this, and lose what little compassion and sanity I have left for failing in my first duty and promise? As she was being devoured by these thoughts, she stared on, and opened her senses to what was happening, as if to add fuel to the already painful emotion she was experiencing, wanting to experience and understand in some way the suffering he felt. They say it is only when the dark is at its greatest do you start to notice even the tiniest bits of light, and while she lay there experiencing the world as it was around her, the light shone like a burning sun to her, and it finally gave way to an idea on how to stop all this in some twisted form of a solution. She started to act on her thoughts immediately, as any time spent on thinking more on it was impossible in the current conditions, and she wouldn't let her now decided on charge suffer one more second if possible. For in the end all beings must pay a debt, and she would be a willing collector and investor in that debt for the first time. Death is a peculiar phenomenon, it's universal, an inevitability striking fear into the very core of any sensible being, as one can never know the end of a story until one gets to it, and once there the rest of the story becomes meaningless. So the mystery of what comes after death has always been a closely guarded secret by those who understood it, and the nature of death was an even greater guarded secret. Kaki was a being that had lived for a very long time, and during that time she had learned more knowledge than any entity alive on the elemental nation, even more than her father, and one of the things she learned or invested in learning about because she dealt it out so often, and usually violently in her adolescence, was death, and all of the forms it came in, and right now she could feel the death energy fluctuating around her. One moment it was there when her warden was just about to embrace it, and the next it was gone, as her warden was healed. When he was near death again, the energy of death would appear once more only to vanish, as he was healed again, and so the brutal dance went on. But, as the death energy was being summoned and dissipated, repeatable a new phenomenon occurred. When a cracked or broken bone is healed, there is always some form of a scar or mark left behind to mark the injury, and over time, if the same thing keeps happening, those leftover marks increase in size and severity, and the once stable bone that was healed so many times is now beyond saving. The same principle can be assigned to death energy, and what happens when a being is near death, but escapes it, and this is what was happening to her warden, and should this horrible cycle continue on for another couple of 100 times, he would eventually die, as the death energy left behind would be greater than his life force even after healing, and would override it, and lead to the snuffing out of the holder's life. Now she had no time, not the inclination to wait that amount of time, and let both her warden and herself experience the hundreds of deaths it would take to get there, but thanks to the secondary actions of the foolish Yondaime during the sealing, she didn't have to. For when he sealed himself in the stomach of the death god along, and took with him her yin chakra, he essentially created a link between her chakra in the realm of death, and her chakra in the realm of the living. Chakra is chakra, and linked together, no matter if it's yin or yang, as it will always search out to find its dance partner, and try to reconnect with it, and, as it was a former energy, and not complete, it couldn't be destroyed, nor could it be converted to death energy, as it usually is when a being with chakra dies. And in the split moments that the death energy was at its height in her container, she could feel her yin chakra in the death realm reach out to reunite with its yang half. If not for the seal that prevented her chakra from leaving until the bearer died, then her yang would meet up with her yin in the death realm, and she would in essence die, as death had a far tighter grip on her yin chakra than she had on her yang in the realm of the living. But because the seal was there, and blessed by the death god himself, it was like an immovable anchor in the realm of the living that she was essentially tied to, and by using this anchor she could reach out every time she felt their yin chakra, and drag it back to her. Now while normally this would increase her reserves, and complete her, it also had a very frightening if not somewhat amusing side benefit. For while she dragged the yin chakra to her, she was also able to increase the flow of the death energy, as well, as by forcing her chakra back to her, it was essentially also bringing what death chakra was attached to it to the host body, as well, increasing the flow of death energy by a tremendous amount. By her estimate, it would mean that within the next 10 cycles or so there would be enough energy to eventually let her warden die, and not suffer further. Now, while this was one goal, there was another more powerful goal, due to the increased flow of death energy, and the Yin chakra, coming directly from the death god himself, as it was technically in his stomach. It would mean that the chance of the death god not noticing the change was near non-existent, and when he did notice, it would lead to him investigating, as stealing from a god in any way was dangerous, and stealing from a death god was to spit in the fact of death itself, and therefore would lead him to her, and that is where the real plan would begin. They say gods don't care for anyone or anything unless it impacts them directly, and for once Kaki was proud to say that was correct in all senses of the word. It was no more than 2 cycles later that the mindscape of her warden darkened, and the rate of death energy flowing out of the body stopped. The lights that were still dimming went out, and the fur on her went to high alert, as a dark and menacing being appeared in front of Kaki. Purple in color with great horns coming from its head, and with a white kimono robe enveloping its body, and in one hand it held prayer beads while in the other it held a ritual knife. Its eyes were dark, and brimming with restrained power were glowering down at the perceived thief that would dare steal something belonging to death itself. For the first time in ages, the Kyubi no Kitsune bowed its head and body in reverence and penance for what it had done, as it wouldn't anger anything you want to make a deal with. My lord, I apologize for stealing from you that which is not mine to claim anymore, but I must speak with you, and wish to make a deal, said Kaki in a solemn tone. The eyes of the Shinigami narrowed, as if judging if what she had to say was worth the wait in just killing her for her insolence. When it made no movement or gesture, Kaki took it as an indication to proceed with her plea. My lord, as you know, I am sealed within the body of Naruto Uzumaki, paying for the crime of attaching the Leaf Village after I was released from his mother, and controlled. If you cast out your senses to the outside world of this body, you can see that that host is being denied death, and by doing so the people of the Leaf are mocking you. She stops talking to allow the Shinigami to see what is happening outside, and to collect her thoughts. The eyes of the death god flit to look over her shoulder, and stare into the distance, as if looking to a far-out place. The only indication that something was agitating, if not angering the death god, was the sound of the prayer beads grinding and groaning against each other, as well as the squeak of the knife handle, as the being hands tightened ever so slightly. If this was done so in the name of the death it was being prevented from claiming, or in the manner in which it was being done, so was not set nor displayed, but, as the knife had yet to descend upon Kaki, she continued quickly, as she also felt the death energy in the mindscape get heavier, and move more eradicable. I wish to make a deal with you. Claim the soul of one Uzumaki Naruto when he is on the cusp of death next, as I know you are within your right to do, and you can have my soul and energy in its entirety when I die, instead of it dissipating and reforming, which is what is usually happening now. On top of that, let me have vengeance for my host on this blaspheming village before you claim me. This I ask, as a favor, stated Kaki, as she looked in the eyes of the Shinigami with resolve, as any sign of weakness would be rooted out if she didn't. For if this worked out, then Naruto would get both peace and vengeance for his death, and she might be able to regain some of her lost honor. The Shinigami looked at her, and then opened its mouth for the first time. Fates, destiny, prophecy, I can't claim, came the short but raspy response from the death god. Fates, destiny, prophecy, what does that mean? Thought Kaki in frustration, as she tried to make sense of what the death god meant by that. Is Naruto part of some king of prophecy? If so, then his destiny is already laid out, and if that is the case, then he is protected by the fates, so not even death can claim him, until he has complete the prophecy. Why do I feel like this is the Toad's fault all over again? Thought Kaki in even more frustration, as she tried to think of a way to bypass this. Death universal, destiny universal, fates universal came with a raspy sound from the death god. Does that mean what I think it does? Why is he saying this? The Kaki in both hope and in suspicion, as a new and much more beneficial plan formed in her mind. Maybe she wouldn't kill the Toads if this worked out. Who was she kidding? She detests Toads after being sat on by one. Okay, new deal then. Let me find a body to reincarnate Naruto's soul in. If death, fate, and destiny are universal, then, no matter what world he is reborn in, he can still complete what has been laid out for him, and you will eventually get to claim his soul. This should be worth a lot more than it is in its current state. If not, then we can wait the 2 or so hours for him to die for real, unless those other 2 intervene somehow to protect Naruto, and if they don't, then this was destined to happen. No. Kaki responded again in hope, as it lit in her eyes for the first time in a while. Yes, she would still die, but Naruto would get a chance to live a better life than he did here. The Shinigami's mouth twitched the smallest amount, as if he was pleased for some reason, and stretched his arms out, while grasping his fingers tight around the objects in them. Both started flowing, as the death energy in the air increased exponentially. All of a sudden the bars to the cell started cracking, and the seal started failing. 2 light could be seen traveling from the seal into the Shinigami's beads, and when finally the dark energy was at its peak, the Shinigami swung his blade, cutting right through it, all the while swinging the beads over the now severed energy. As it absorbed some form of dark golden energy that looked to be starting to fray, Kaki started to fade in the mindscape, as it got darker, and lost all concept of space and substance, and the Shinigami vanished, still wearing a small twisted smile, while holding the new energy. The last thing one could see in the dark was a large set of white fangs curled in a smile that promised fire and blood in abundance to come. Konoha Force. Their mood in the clearing was one of jubilation for the simple reason that the greatest insult to the people of Konoha was finally getting what it deserved, and they all had a front seat to its execution. The fact the demon couldn't die due to its regenerative powers was a great unexpected plus, and they made sure to make use of it. The fire had been going for about 5 hours now, and the screaming of the demon was like constant sweet music to their ears, and made them all forget about what they had lost to it years ago. Some had lost sons, other daughters or father, and mothers, some husband, and wives or brother, and sisters. Now all were getting their justly earned vengeance. It did not matter if a demon was sealed in the body of a child, as the child was already corrupted by the demon the second it was in there, and it needed to be destroyed. Who cared about an orphan brat anyway? And this did seem like the best way it could have happened. The child's body acted as the prison to the demon, and let them hear through his screams what the demon was feeling. On top of that, they were doing their civic duty by banishing a demon from a possessed child. Maybe they could petition to get in reward from the fire temple. After all, they were doing their job for them, some thought. No thought was given to the child's suffering, and if it was unfair to him or if they should just make it quick, as mercy was not what this was about. Iruka, we finally did it, we finally avenged our families, and the demon is suffering, said a silver-haired man to a brown-haired individual that was sitting beside him drinking some sake. I know, did you know if we didn't do this, I would have had to teach it next year how to be a shinobi. Can you imagine that, stated the now identified Iruka, horrified at the idea. Well, thank the gods for Kakashi then, and his ability to lure away its protection, and trap the monster anyway. I need to go to relieve myself. Be back shortly, stated the silver-haired, as he walked towards the fire that was burning with the silhouette of a child in it, and proceeded to urinate into the fire, paying particular attention to where he was aiming. To the side of the clearing, tied to a tree, screaming and weeping, were a man and his daughter. The ramen chef and his daughter were caught trying to protect the monster, so now they had front row seats to see what should happen to demons, or so they were told. Boy, stop screaming or you will get far worse than just being tied up. You're demon's lovers, and should be hoping to be purged of its influence once it's dead. If you keep screaming and making a noise, you will ruin this lovely night. We might need to discipline you even more. But don't worry, we won't touch you, old man. I think we can discipline both for you through your daughter, shouted one of the men in the clearing, while giving the girl tied to the tree a lecherous stare, which was being copied by some others once they heard the shouting. The chef's eyes blazed like an unholy fire, but then dimmed just as quickly as he realized how hopeless the situation was, and he hung his head and stayed quiet, motioning for his daughter to do the same, avoiding the reproachful stare he got in response, but nonetheless she followed suit. Suddenly the screams of agony originating from the fire stopped and was replaced with a deafening silence. As the demon dies, it seems to have finally used all its demonic powers in regenerating. What now? I say we piss on the ashes, and then scatter them to the winds. While this twisted discussion about what to do with the child's remains happened, no one noticed that the color of the flames had changed color from an orange to a deep blood red. They did, however, notice when they were blown off their feet into the air by a powerful chakra blast. Once he had orientated himself after being sent flying, Iruka turned in the direction of the fire, his heart stopping and eyes widening. His tanned skin, which was the envy of many and had gotten him into a few beds, had turned white as he was unable to comprehend what was in front of him. How has this happened? This wasn't supposed to happen. It was a demon-possessed child. It was supposed to burn with the brat, not this. What have we done? Thought Iruka in pure dread, as he looked up at the tall red fur, like lined pillars in front of him, and had his eyes travel up them like gazing up a sick and bloated tree. Going up from the leg all the way to the top was a hat that looked like a fox with large bunny-style ears, and then down the sleek trimmed body of the fox, all the way to 9 flowing tails that waved behind it, knocking over and destroying much of the forest that was in its vicinity. He followed the fox's hand as it lifted itself up along with its tails, watched as it was ignited in a red fire that spread throughout its body, and his heat could be felt even from where he was standing, and then with a single motion that sounded like a hurricane winds came down so fast that he couldn't blink. As he would miss it, he wished he had blinked. When the tails and the hand landed, it first sent a shock wave through the earth that could be felt from his toes to his skull. It reverberated around the body for a bit before traveling back down, and before re-entering the ground all in a split second. The shockwave traveled on through the forest and to the tall walls of the city and beyond. Then came the real carnage, as the earth was ripped up out of the ground like a hand had come from the sky and clucked it up and was tossing it about. Those close to the impact zone, like the ramen chef and his daughter, died instantly with no pain. Those who were outside it tried to run or avoid being crushed by falling boulders that came crashing back down to earth. Not that it mattered much, as when the shock wave in the earth hit them, they were once again blown off their feet, only this time with the earth following them and landing on them. Iruka could only stare in horror, as his friends, another who had come to what was supposed to be a celebration, were crushed to death, until he noticed a shadow overtake his. Looking up, he saw a new set of boulders coming towards him, and knew he could not outrun or dodge them. "I'm coming to you finally, my beloved family," were his final thought, as he was crushed under 20 tons of earth, his last sight being the angry visage of a giant fox with a dark horned figure looming behind it, a sick and twisted smile on its face, like it had achieved a victory that it had previously been denied. The same look was copied on the fox's face, but was mixed with a rage that set even the air around it on fire, it seemed. Once it had finished with the pests and the clearing, the Kyuubi turned its attention to the village, its hate for it prevalent in its red eyes, as its wide gaping maw opened up, and small balls of red and blue chakra gather in front of it, and the villagers' screams could be heard, as people started to realize the danger they were in, and heard the siren sound used to lure people to evacuate the village. She saw, as its shinobi forces ran towards her, as if in some vain attempt it would help. Humans might be ingenious and stubborn, but they were not gods, and this time it was she who had one on her side. But it was too late, and unlike last time, things were very different. She wasn't being controlled, so her attention and concentration was not on trying to regain control of her body. She didn't have a giant toad or a seal master to deal with her chains to contain her. Her anger wasn't split between too many people. It was now solely focused on the accursed village in front of her, and she came here not as a mindless, controlled beast, but as a being with great power in its possession, and a plan on how to make its anger known. There was nothing and no one to stop her, and she knew it, and reveled in the thought. Vengeance is swift, and a scorned woman's vengeance is even swifter, and she was a scorned female with near infinite chakra, and a lot of vengeance pointed at not only at the village, but at the world that failed to meet her father's expectations, and imprisoned and tortured her siblings, for no matter how much they annoyed her with their own weakness, they were still hers, and she would have her vengeance in their name. An arm made of red fire came out of her torso, and with a swat that sent out a great shockwave of air that ripped trees out of the ground, that sent all the incoming shinobi flying back with many of them, impacted the great walls that now had a new purpose, that being that instead of acting as a defense against attacks, acted as a cage to the people inside, and those that hit it died on impact. There was no yondaime to teleport away the get-tailed beast ball that went traveling from the Kyuubi's mouth to the Hokage monument, faster than most people could track. No Ichihara Senju to contain the blast that ripped through the mountain face, wiping out the 4 faces that adorned, as well as also killing anyone that was lucky enough to make it to the shelters, as it now became their tomb. The return blast traveled over the village, stopping only halfway to the wall, leaving anything within the blast zone little more than ash. When the outside of the blast zone, those lucky enough to get inside shelters would probably survive, while those not in shelters would be lucky to survive the backlash. The Kyuubi then turned its head towards the sky, and once again gathered chakra in its mouth once more, but this time it was far greater than before. It poured nearly all its remaining chakra into it, making the tailed beast ball the size of a mountain. It then swallowed it, and then proceeded to shoot it out of its mouth at a speed, then boggled the mind in the direct of the thing that would be the key to its vengeance. "I'm sorry, father, but this world is no longer the world you defended and died for. It no longer deserves to survive, and the one that could have carried you can no longer do so here. I will purge this world of life, and hopefully it will start a new," thought Kaki, as she watched her greatest attack impact upon the moon, breaking off a large chunk of it that came hurtling towards the elemental nations. Knowing that this would kill thousands if not millions filled her with sadness, but it was pale compared to her rage at the state of the world. Their siblings and their hosts would survive, and who knows, maybe they would prevent some of the damage getting the recognition they deserve, but in the end it was up to them if they wanted to save as much humans as they could. She had already cast her vote, she concluded, as the part of the moon that was coming to the earth started to glow red, and she started to fade once more. Maybe the afterlife won't be that bad. I can get some sleep without having to worry for once, and I can see father again, she thought contently, as the last of her presence on the planet faded away, never to be seen or felt again. And the flashback. "And I was so looking forward to some sleep," she wistfully lamented, as she started to glow a bright red color, the shape of the glowing form changing, losing the 9 tails that dragged behind. When the glowing stopped, in its place was a tall woman with the look of nobility, with blood-red hair with porcelain skin, wearing the same kimono as she was before, the katana now strapped to her back. Gone was the suffocating presence, and in its place a calm and indifference, one that gave of a vibe of uncaring and unapproachable, just as she had intended. As she had not interest in spending her talking to a race that had let her down so much, even it was a new land. Well, later, after this is all done, I can get some more beauty sleep, as this whole ordeal has left me a bit frazzled, she smiled, as she started to make her way to the city on a hill. She looked down at her hands at the glass container that contained the soul of one Naruto Uzumaki, a lot brighter in color than when it was removed from his body, and more wholesome as well, which greatly pleased her, as remember what she was told to do before she arrived in this land. Find a body, preferably a child or baby's, place the soul in it, and then a bit of my essence if possible, and once done I shall fade away, reminding herself what needed to be done. She was going to give Naruto a new life, and more importantly she got to choose what type of life he was going to have. For the first time ever, her maternal side came forth, making it clear that nothing but the best home and future would be acceptable for Naruto, and she doesn't have the room to fail in this self-appointed duty. It was very convenient that the Shinigami, under the pressure of the fates, and because it would mean the Naruto's soul wouldn't be tainted by her energy, was reverted to when it was pure then, when it had been when he had died in that world. She was told that the memories, and the true personality of the new reincarnated body, would absorb the soul of Naruto, as well as his memories, and personality too, but they would be sealed away to prevent having to the body's native soul, and would slowly leak into the new body, so it could adapt better. When she asked what would happen with his memories of that night, she was informed that his soul was retrieved the day before it happened, as if taken that night the damage done to it would not make it possible to reincarnate, so it would have no recollection of that night, nor have experienced the same emotion as it had previously. She nearly kissed the Shinigami after this statement. Best not think of that. As she started to walk towards the targeted city, she walked through a village that had a very interesting feature, the ginormous skull of a demon with many horns. From what she had seen on a sign for directions, the village was called Hage, and was a small farming village with some farms, and a church, and a near-perfect view of the far-off city that it was in the shadow of. She saw fields upon fields with rows upon rows of underground crops being grown, looking ready to burst from the ground already. The sun, and the need to harvest the grown crops, seemed to have caused all the residents to come out and partake in the harvest, as evident by the amount of people using magic to clear the fields, from the men picking out the crops to the children cleaning and ripping of any leaves while leaving in more of a mess than they clean, as was usually in their nature. Off to one side of the village was a church grey with stone structure and bland in design, with a single black-haired priest standing outside shaking hands with people, and when noticing her offering her a polite nod as she walked by, her returning it, resulting in the attention that she was already receiving to increase, as the men watching her fell instantly under her gaze and smile. Deciding it was for the best to leave the village as quickly as possible, as she had already drawn too much attention, she sped up her pace, knowing she couldn't just vanish, as it would bring even more unwanted investigations. As she was passing the giant skull, she felt some energy that was both wholesome, but also full of dread at the same time. Looking at the demon skull, she could see that on top of it was a statue of some boy or small man, that for some reason was emanating some of the weird wholesome energy, along with more energy coming from the inside the skull, as well, that was a lot more sinister in nature. But, as much as she wanted to investigate the phenomenon, and find out what could give off such a vibe, and challenge it, as she was always up for a good fight, it was not the goal of this journey, and for her bringing Naruto back to life, and making him happy was far more important than saying her battle lust. As she left the village, she gave pause, and gave a quick squinted look one last time to the giant skull, and smirked, thinking I could totally take that on, as she one more made her way down the road with a slight hop in her step. Arriving in the giant city took a bit longer than she had hoped for, partly due to the fact that she didn't move as fast as she could, as she didn't want to risk any form of danger or damage to the soul container, which would ruin and possibly start her on a rampage in frustration. The city was much larger than any in the elemental nations, and quite frankly put what city the nations did have to shame, with stone buildings that shined, the warmer, and a much brighter atmosphere, and the fact it looked more sophisticated than the nations made for a much better improvement over Konoha, even with its social class issues. As she woke, she could see people once again using magic everywhere, to do simple to complex tasks like heating food, to building a new store, to even in one case, creating a small cloud over flowers to protect them from the sun, and provide some rain, as well as flying on brooms, and was it a magic carpet? Much more versatile than chakra, it seems. Weird, the curious and giddy thoughts going through her head, as she imagined all the cool things Naruto would do with magic. Though why they need those glowing books to do it was still confusing, as from what she can feel the magical energy was in the person, not the book, so surely they could just do stuff without a book. Maybe because they lacked a proper magical network in the body like chakra did they needed the books to help channel the energy in different forms. As she passed on by a couple using some form of wind magic to levitate a new couch down the street, she put the thought to the side, and decided to think on it later. She was hungry, and still had a lot of work to do. Once again, her thoughts of food and rest were overruled by the necessity of the mission bestowed upon her, and she started to look for someone or someplace where Naruto could be reincarnated, or at least get some information to where was best to start, as none of the people around her matched the energy requirements needed to hold a second soul before it merged, or to match her expectations for Naruto. Even the strangely colored robed humans that had a much higher magical energy than most were mostly lacking, with only one or two barely meeting her entry-level criteria. She decided to spend much of her initial time in the city look for answers in one of the local bars, listening to conversations, as she knew that where alcohol flowed so did loose lips, and loose lips made for free information. She quickly discovered she was in Clover Kingdom, and this was the capital, and that there was several other kingdoms around them, all named after a suit of cards in a deck. Weird, but she had seen and experienced weirder cough talking giant toads. The more she listened, the more she learned of the Clover Kingdom she was in, as there were for some reason two kings, one for the kingdom as a whole, and one for the wizards, or was she getting it right? Sounded a lot like the shinobi system with the daimyo, and the cages, meaning the Clover King had more power than the Wizarding King, even though it did seem that the Wizarding King had more respect, and was liked more than the Clover King. There were 3 royal families for some reason, and not one. How that logic works she didn't know. Currently the royal house of Kier were the ruling family with Augustus Kier Clover she, the current king of the Clover kingdom, but from what I heard he was a fool with a big head, and very little potential, and his arrogance and vanity made his subject dislike him, and there was even whispers of wanting the wizarding king to be the sole ruler instead. Then there was the Silva family who were a bunch of stuck in the muds from what she could get, but were able to manipulate their chosen element into shapes for them to fight, and were overall the most level-headed if not a bit on the arrogant side, as well, a trait she felt was shared by any family that had power for too long without a good kick every now and then to bring them back down to reality. They seemed to hold a hereditary seat as captains of a wizarding knight squad, and were said to be exceptional fighters. And finally, there was the Vermillion family, which to her sounded a lot like the Uzumaki family, what with their red or orange hair, and their love of fights, no back-down attitude, as well as being insanely passionate, and somewhat obsessed with vows they made to the point of it was said that they burned themselves when they made a vow. Overall, she was more inclined to the Vermillion family for obvious reasons, as the attitude was already a key part of Naruto's personality, and like always red and orange was just too cool of a color to ignore. From what she had heard from people in the bar over the last few days, both the wives of the heads of families were pregnant, so that would make things a lot easier, and, as well, safer for Naruto when it came to placing the soul in a body. Implanting the soul into a fetus would make the merger a lot easier, as the soul of yet-to-be-born baby would not be fully developed yet with experience or memories, and so would absorb Naruto's soul quicker, as well as the added soul during the development stage would make the overall body and final soul a lot more resilient to taint and corruption. Also, the child would have a more potent and powerful mana source, as not only would it still be developing its mana capacity for years to come even after it's born, but it would also have Naruto's added potential source, as well. As all bodily energies no matter what form it takes are connected to the soul, as energy cannot be created or destroyed, what really happens is the soul starts to harness the energy in the surrounding atmosphere, and then absorbs it, and converts it into new energy for the body. The more potent the soul, the faster it absorbs the surrounding energy, and more potent the new converter energy is, and the stronger the body is the greater its capacity to hold this new form of energy. So by adding Naruto's already potent soul to an already potent soul, as it seems that royals develop some of the most potent souls in this kingdom, when it is compared to most of the other humans around, and with some extra internal body modifications from her energy, the resulting body and soul should be very powerful in the years to come. She couldn't wait to see what happens if she was still around to see it. After a few days of playing with the idea, she decided it was time to go and complete the transfer, as holding back would not be good for Naruto's soul at all, as a soul needed a body if it wasn't in the afterlife, or at least it'd start to go mad, as the world of the living was for the living, and a soul was not technically native to that part of the world, and needed a body to ground it for say. As she started to travel along the main street towards the top of the city where the residence of the royals were located, she started to come up with a plan on how to get into the Vermillion residence, and implant Naruto's soul into the pregnant female that resided there. It wouldn't be a long or hard process, just needed to be done safely, and not disturb lest the mother die, and that was unacceptable, as a mother's love was key in developing a child's person, and Naruto wouldn't be without a mother if she could help it. She was passing by restrained on her left. It looked a bit snobbish with a lot of those wizarding knights eating in there, and some nobles, so it had to be expensive with its oak furniture, and magical lights, and suited up serving staff. Though she did give pause, as she passed by a window only to hear some quiet talking. I heard the king's wife is deadly ill, and might not survive the pregnancy along with the unborn child. Though I didn't hear about the king's wife being pregnant, she thought in shock. Hearing this, she looked around, and spotting a dark alleyway right away opposite from the restraint, she cloaked herself in its darkness, and turned her hearing onto the conversation. Well, this is an interesting development. The two men were in magical knight's robes, one in a red robe, another in a blue and silver robe. Both had their backs turned to her, so couldn't see her listening to them, as they discussed something that was probably very private in an open-air restraint with the window open. I didn't know she was pregnant. How did you hear? As the red-robed figure. I'm part of the royal guard sometimes, and the servants all gossip near us, believing we are as deaf to them as our emotion says. Anyway, apparently the king has stopped caring, and is back to sleeping with two separate women again, all the while leaving the poor queen to endure the illness alone, and will probably not care about the unborn child either, said the silver man without any remorse. Well, what can you expect from our king? What is she ill with? Surely they have a cure of some kind that can come from the royal medics. Apparently it's a magical curse that sucks up any mana that tries to enter the body, and there is no known way of getting rid of the curse of the illness without magic, as there is no non-magical treatment to it, so both the queen and the unborn prince are going to die this time. A bit of sadness could be heard from the silver-robed male. What makes you so sure it's a male? Seems more like a female from the attitude and general disposition of the king. Servant told me, said the wizard Dr. Owen ran tests, and gave gender to the babe, just before she got ill. Well, that's a shame, we could do with an heir, and the queen kept the king somewhat grounded if only for a bit, lamented the red-robed figure. Hearing all she needed to hear for now, Kaki began to move on again, but this time with new thoughts, and a new plan in her mind. What can you say if you want to succeed? You need to be like a river, and adapt to the best path. I could save the queen. It wouldn't be unheard of for a traveling doctor or medics to try to save the likes of royalty for a reward, and while I'm at it, can present Naruto's soul as some form of cure, which it is in some way for the unborn prince at least. And if royals have the most potent of souls, then a prince's soul should be the most potent of all. Healing the queen would be easy, as curses are little more than a nuisance to my powers, and it would have the side effect of increasing the overall health of the queen so as to give Naruto a mother for certain, and if the king and queen don't spend time together, then she will spend more time with her son. And from what I heard, she is the sensible one out of the two, so best he picks up his habits from her, and not from that kingly idiot. Yes, the prince's body would be the perfect soul to host for Naruto's reincarnation. Came the now ecstatic thoughts of Kaki, all thoughts of the previous Vermillion plan, forgotten for this much higher risk plan, that also could yield greater results. She nearly floated towards the royal palace now, purposely bringing the attention of others to her, so they would never forget what she was about to do for them all. But she paid little attention to the other people looking or gazing at her, as she was spending all the while coming up with a plan, as well as a backstory on how she would be able to lift the curse, and she would lift the curse, as no pathetic curse could stop her, and her chakra. Then she would cure the queen's illness, which is also easy, as cake, as again the glory of chakra. All this while she was reincarnating Naruto into a body a lot sooner than expected, but she would still be happy that he could finally have a life without prejudice or hate, and one day be the leader she now knew he should have been given a chance to be in his last life, because watch out world, as Uzumaki is here, and they excel at messing up other people's dreams. A small whistling sound sweet and deadly hit the ears of passers-by, as a beautiful woman passed them, making them smile at its sound, not knowing what changes were in store for them, and the kingdom in the years to come. The smell of death is a smell that most creatures in the universe become accustomed to in one form or another, be it a relative seeing another relative close to death, or the unfortunate prey that is just about to be eaten by the predator, after watching its companion suffer a similar fate. The truth of this smell is quite simple, but quickly forgotten once one is able to get away from the source of that smell, though it is not as simple as moving to a different location, as some would have you believe. When one is dying over a period of time or witnessing death, that is when the smell becomes prominent, for the term smells like death is actually completely incorrect in some ways. The true term should be one that smells of despair that witnessed death, but like most true sayings, it is not catchy enough to be remembered. For it is when we witness or experience death over a prolonged period, and come to not only accept its inevitability, but also the hopelessness of fighting it, does one truly start to smell of death, as they give way to the despair that follows this experience. This couldn't be truer for a single room in the tall tower that jutted out of a grand palace, its lowly existence in the sky, a testament to the distant feeling that its occupant felt to the very notion of hope. At the foot of the tower, just by its entrance, which took the form of two large metal-studded doors that had the image of two lions clashing with each other from either side of the door, with a three-leaf clover engraved above them, itself being evenly divided between the two clashing lions. Before it stood a group of 4 guards all draped in red robes with medals proudly displayed on them, and standing to attention, as if they were about to enter a parade ground in front of the king himself. Such stiffness that they exuded that one would be mistaken in thinking that they wouldn't notice a marching band going by, but one only had to look at their eyes to see them sharp and observant, darting around the corridor, constantly inspecting the space, peering into every shadow and crevice, along with every dark spot, doing it once, and then twice more before moving one to the next spot. So great was their gaze, and so thorough was their search, as even the spider that was in a dark crevice in on the top corner of a wall could not even hide from it. This resolve was needed, as what lay behind the door was of great importance to both the kingdom and to the captain of their squad, and under no circumstance could they afford to fail on this duty. Behind the door, and up the winding stone stairs that stopped at several landings that gave way to entrances for rooms that occupied the tower, one would need to go to the last landing to finally arrive at another set of doors, equally impressive as the ones that gave entrance to the tower, where there was another pair of similar attired wizards standing guard. Behind these doors was the true owner of the tower, not that she could ever feel like it at this time. The room was opulent in its splendor, with gold and red tapestries lining the wall, and a large entrance to a balcony that looked out onto the impressive palace and its gardens. The entrance was draped in a rich gold and red curtain heathen material so as to prevent any light from penetrating it once drawn to a close. The room itself was tidy in nature, with a dresser and gold-rimmed mirror on one end that held an assortment of vanity items, and a large dresser and wardrobes on the other end of the room that held the everyday clothes for its occupants. It was well carpeted so as to prevent any unnecessary contact with the cold stone floor, and a large heart with a roaring fire burning in it, as it was framed by 2 more stone lions that gave off the impression of breathing out the fire like the dragons of old. Beside the fire lay a large pellet mat that was littered with small golden hair, and with indents that gave off the impression that until recently it was occupied, but quickly vacated. Large windows, once again framed in the same material as the balcony entrance, situated at even intervals around the room so as to provide as much light as possible, though for now the drapes were drawn in this case, while allowing for some form of privacy in the blind spots. In one of the corners was a halfway partition allowing for one to change behind it without being seen, and a wash basin beside it to wash one's hand. The center of the room up against the wall held a large bed that held a down mattress that was large enough for several people to lay on it without being cramped, a white duvet with intricate floral patterns that sparkled from the sun's rays that showed through the balcony reflected off it. Plush pillows that were recently padded were at its head, and to one side was a countertop with a wash basin and a wet towel draped over it, while on the stood a small rocking crib that was missing its inhabitant with a mobile toy hanging over it that proudly displayed golden lions, silver birds, and green four-leaf clovers that gently swayed in the breeze that lightly circled through the room from the open balcony. In the bed with her head propped against a pillow and eyes wide open, but not truly focusing on anything, as if staring off into space or staring off into some distant memory that its owner was trying to escape, to lay the Queen of Clover Kingdom herself, Her Royal Highness Queen Catherine Vermillion Clover, who even now was unable to fulfill her duties as queen, and was reduced to this bed in a lonely tower, while absently stroking the large bump that protruded from her stomach. Her once vibrant red hair was now dull from lack of care both physically and mentally. Her green eyes that were once shone with such intensity that it would shock and enthrall many that looked into it were now dull and near lifeless, having not even the energy to move from their current position. A body that was once been so full of life and strength that it allowed its wielder to match even the most hardened wizarding captains in the sparring ring, and was able to catch the attention of many admirer, was now frail and dangerously skinny, the skin being nearly too big for the body that had now lost so much energy, and muscles that had hung from it nearly as much as the surrounding drapes. But even in her current state that would destroy near anyone else's strength yet held, and a small spark of defiance showed in the near lifeless eyes for the small life that was growing in her womb, hoping against all hope that she would last long enough to see her most prized creation and passion come into this world, one last act of defiance against not only death, but also against all those who abandoned her, pitied her, or whispered around her that she could not achieve this one crucial role, especially her misguided fool of a husband that was one of the first to forget and dishonor her. She knew she didn't have long left. She could feel death's icy grip tighten every day, and that one day soon she would go for her final sleep. But until that day all she needed was one day more so he could be born. Many who had come to see her, and would then quickly leave, all the while whispering that the room smelled of death, and then quickly rushed from the room, all the while giving weak-willed excuses to do so, but to her the room smelled like life, and hope, a life to be born, and a hope that to her was ever enduring. She mostly now passed her time telling old stories to her still in the womb, stories of a happier time long past, when the sun's light glowed even brighter, when she had been a young and strong cub that would face the world around her without fear. Of how that will and endurance was now being inherited by her niece Leona, who thrived in such an environment, and would soon also inherit the position of the first lioness of the Vermillion family, and its duty to protect its fire and future. She told stories of her oldest friend Julius, who was now near to becoming a great leader in his own right, and of his fantastical magic, though even for all its power, it was powerless to heal her of this accursed curse. How he and her brother had left the capital so they could find a way for mommy to get better, though silently she left out how she had little hope for any result. She even told her son stories of his ridiculous father, that made more of a show of himself than a jester, and his facial expression would set a room to laughter, if not for the position he held, and how she didn't regret marrying him, as if he gave her son. For each story she told, her eyes would grow dimmer, as less focus, as if trying harder each time to penetrate the memory, and go back in time to it. She regretted very few events in her life, as all of them led to the next event which led her to this moment. The only thing she might regret was not turning up her fire to full blast, when she was fighting that damn devil, that thought it could take control of her body, not know that by letting Nahama escape back to the underworld, it would instruct the devil Magicula to curse her for her so-called insolence in staying alive. She should have just incinerated them both alive, but some form of humanity in her prevents her from intentionally taking a life, even if it was a devil-possessed being. And now look at her, cursed to feel pain whenever she used her magic, or magic flowed through her body, and if that wasn't enough then poison so as to have a slow death. They saying that being good never pays, seems to her that saying is proving to be more true each passing day. As she once again started to look up at the top of her canopied bed, and recede back into a more favorable memory, her attention was dragged to the woman that had just stepped onto her balcony, all the while looking like not only was she always there, but that she belonged there. Wait, what the hell is she doing here? Is she here to finally kill me? Please let me live long enough to see my baby. At least her tails are the right color tails. The shocking thoughts that went through her head, as her once lifeless eyes were now white, opened in no small amount of fear and dread, but also some curiosity, as they stared at the 9 red fluffy appendages that were arrayed behind her new guest. Leading up to the fateful meeting, Kaki was for a better term bored out of her mind, if not bordering on sight madness from the constant stupidity of the wizards in front of her. Honestly, you would think your queen dying is more important than where I was born, though Kaki in exasperation, as she was close to losing her already short fuse to the group of quite frankly rude wizards in front of her. They had just finished telling her that the king did not want some present heck of a quack doctor, being even in the presence of the queen, let alone touching her, and that the queen had no need of whatever subpar aid she could lend them. They acted as if the queen was not dying along with their unborn prince, as if their own royal doctors had somehow been able to alleviate the queen of her burden. If anything, they were the useless ones, not her. It was them that were unable to lift a simple curse, not her. Honestly, if it wasn't all in the name of Naruto, and the future he might bring, she would have just killed these wizards, and just went on ahead. But it wouldn't do to leave Naruto in a kingdom that might despise him for her going on a rampage again. As she stood there leaning against the stone facade that stood in front of the palace entrance, she started to try to think up another plan to achieve her goals, as this one had clearly not been a runner due to the gift of human stupidity, that seemed to be a gift that just kept on giving. Maybe the queen isn't worth it. It could just be easier to go to the Vermillion resident and go through with the original plan, get entrance by gaining their respect by kicking their asses. Then they challenge me to a fight, as if they are anything like the Uzumakis. Then that is exactly how to do it. Worked well with the tomato head or redheads the last time she started to think, as the current situation was reaching a tipping point in her already limited capacity for patience when it came to humans. Lady, we can't let you in. We already told you that. His Majesty has made it clear that your so-called services are not needed. Her Grace is already recovering from the treatment administered by the royal healers. So beat it, shouted the gruff and roughly looking wizard, who seemed to be in charge of the guards assembled at the door. His stance becomes aggressive, as he raises fists, and steps forwards ready to truly confront the woman, but she does not comply with the king's demands, quickly being followed by his comrades around him. So be it then, I'm going, but be aware that by preventing me from helping you are condemning your queen to death along with her child, as I know none in the palace have the ability to do what needs to be done to save her life. Came the quick and hot-headed response from the now near apoplectic response from the new quite visibly enraged female, the killing intent rolling off her so much that many of the guards were darting their eyes to the closest exit near them, as some of them had already had experienced the result of an angry female, especially those in the red robes. None but the now leaving Kaki could sense the powerful presence that was observing the failed interaction. Vermillions it is then. Congratulations, your soon-to-be child will be a king one day, as it seems that the current one does not want to build a legacy, so when he dies of an unfortunate accident in let's say the next decade or so, the crown will pass to the most capable male royal, which I will make sure is Naruto's new host, was the somewhat vindictive thought that was not crossing the mind of the now sinister grinning fox in human form, as she quickly strode away from the main palace, and changed direction towards the residence of the Vermillion family, all the while thinking on how to end a certain royal's life, or make sure it would end, but she is not around to do so. Well, that is certainly a frightening face. I hope it's not me that is the recipient of whatever you are plotting. A smooth and silky voice interrupted her momentary internal mental tantrum. The humor, and somewhat down-like lazy attitude of the response, had Kaki play with the idea of just blasting the insect from her presence, but decided to humor the soon-to-be dead fool. Looking to her right, she could see that it was not a singular person, but two that were just standing there, both gazing at her with no small amount of amusement in their eyes. One was a tall blonde male that had a strange blue star on his forehead. His purple eyes shone bright with intelligence and a great amount of curiosity, though his appearance did look a bit ragged, as if he had just rushed back from some great distance away, and had not the chance to calm his looks. His light blue and white robes held a silver-like stag head emblem, with 2 medals pinned to his right breast. The magical power being exuded from him was far greater than nearly all those around him, and was close to rivaling his companion. There was also a small oddity in the fact that she could sense a small trail of magic leading from him to somewhere else outside the city, which was a first for her so far. Maybe he had a magical phylactery of something so he didn't die or something. Ha, like that would help him. The points for trying, I must say. This is a first in a long time, mused the now somewhat perplexed Kitsune. In front of him stood a slightly imposing female, not that Kaki would ever admit it, who was quite obviously the one in charge. She stood in a more laid-back stance, resting nearly on the balls of her back feet, as she leaned back in an obvious display of a person with a now nonchalant attitude. But Kaki's eyes could see the muscles in the legs ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. She was attired in a white and silver robe with large medals and badges adorning it. It left a lot to imagine, as it was in no way clinging to her body. Her dark black hair spilled over her shoulders, braided, and then joined up in an ever larger single braid that went down to her stomach. A calm and serene smile graced her lips, while her grey eyes were only slightly open to the giving her, which would have given her the look of a cat that just found its canary with a slightly amused twinkle in it. At her side was a katana with a green hilt which grew loosely. The magical energy she gave off was greater than any around her, but still seemed to be restraining itself from being fully released, and had a dark sinister vibe hidden behind the calm and serene effect it seemed to give off. This was Isabelle Silva, one of the matriarchs of the Silva family, and the anointed wizarding king of the Clover kingdom, not queen, but king for whatever reason. Isabelle was the older unmarried sister of the current captain of the Silver Eagles wizarding squad Aesir Silva. Her magic on Holy Earth had near the same effect as the dead bone release. Should it touch you or any other organic material, it causes it to rot away into nothing. The earth particles that her magic created could be utilized into any form she desired, and so made it near impossible to match her in combat. But because of the power and uniqueness of her magic, she was always the odd one out in her family, and so drove herself to prove her strength, and so make others realize that magic didn't make the wizard, but more so that the wizard made the magic. She had a great love for her family, and strived to be a symbol to them, even if she was rarely around due to her duties. She had just recently learned that her sister was with child again, and had in secret gushed over it with her, as it wouldn't do for her subordinates to see her in such a compromising position. "No, it is not, but I'm busy, and my time is running short, so what can I do for you?" Came the quick and sharp response from Kaki. "We heard your confrontation with the guards, and your request to help the queen. Is it true that you can heal her?" The speed and the excitement in the voice of the blonde was quite annoying to Kaki's sensitive ears. "My magic is revival magic, and specialized in not only rebuilding a body's health, but also banishing any taints in the body or its mana." "That is so cool. By the way, where is your grimoire?" said the blind man, now with stars in his eyes, all the while bouncing on his feet looking like a child that had just come across their favorite sweet. "Where's your?" came an equally quick and sharp response. "Touché," the blonde said while rubbing the back of his head with slight embarrassment. "If your magic can do all you say, and we can get you to the queen, how long will it take to cure her, and will there be any side effects to either her or the child?" Interceded Isabelle directly, and firmly so, as to prevent the encounter from turning away from the true topic. She knew how single-minded her protégé can become when he sees new magic. "It shouldn't take long, but that might change based on the condition I start treating her in, and the only side effect would be mild, so sleep, and good food to restore the loss of energy. And yes, as you asked, the unborn prince will be fine," Kaki answered calmly, as some of her hope started to return. If she got the support from the wizarding king, then she might be able to proceed with the plan. "And what would you be looking for in return?" Isabelle asked in a suspicious tone. "The only thing I want in return is to be allowed pick a magical artifact from the silver reliquary if possible, and if it's acceptable by you I need to ask for something, or it would seem suspicious," calculated Kaki, pleased that she was so close to getting her way now. The true cost for her services could never be told to them, as they would never accept it. Plus the Silva family has long been involved with magical artifacts, and the elves from what she had garnered, and that should mean they have a large amount of artifacts, that she might be able to get something from that could further her goals. "So be it, if you are able to help the queen and the unborn child, as well as remove the curse, then I will allow you to select one artifact of your choosing from the silver reliquary so long as it's acceptable," came the confirmation response from Isabelle, who, while a bit suspicious of the request, was happy that that was all it would take to heal her friend and rival. Both herself and Julius, the bald man with her, had spent the last few months trying to chase down any leads on cures or healers that might be able to heal their queen, but to no luck. Only a devil could undo another's curse. The bad news was that the devil that casted the curse was one that specialized in them, so that made it even harder. They had heard rumors of a woman that could absorb magic into her body, as well as life force from other beings into her body, which if it was true, would be a vastly overpowered magic, but by the time they got to the area she was last seen she was gone. Apparently, she was a hermit that either shunned society or was shunned by it, because of the issues that her magic could cause to others if they got too near her. They had tried to search her for her more, and had even offered an award for leads resulting in finding her, but in the end they were unable to, as it seemed the promise of a reward had the opposite effect of driving her even further into hiding. For fear of all the people now searching for her, they had eventually had to call the search off, as it had stated to turn up some very negative result from the surrounding areas. They had returned to the capital to see if any of the other parties sent out to find a cure had returned with a solution, but this was not the case, with many not having returned yet, and those that had returned didn't need to speak, as the state of their disposition was all that was needed to get answers. They had just finished reporting to the king that another search had failed, where they had been dismissed without any query, and told they should not interfere with the internal affairs of House Kier, in which after stating that the king lay his head back on one of his mistress's lap, and went back to sleep, as if all was right with the world. It was, as they were making their way back to the palace assigned to the wizarding king, that they happened upon the confrontation between the royal gate guards and the crimson-haired woman, that from the look in her eyes, was one step from just slaughtering the whole bunch. They stayed silent and hidden, as they listened in on the demands of the woman, as there was no way it sounded like a plea, to allow her to treat the queen, as she could undo the curse, and heal her. The stupidity of some people still astounded her, and if they were not royal guards under the direction of the king himself, she would have demoted all of them for such callous behavior. As it was the only way to fix all this was to see if the woman was still inclined to help even after all the ridicule she had endured. But that still leaves the issue of how am I supposed to get to the queen, as it seems the eternal sentinels at the door are not inclined to let me in, and from what I know you don't have control of them, do you? Stated the now fully listening and invested crimson-haired woman, her eyes now full of excitement and a building hope. First thing to do is to introduce each other. I am Isabelle Silva, the Wizarding King of Clover Kingdom, she proudly stated, as there was nothing but pride in her at her achievements. Nice to meet you, I'm Julius Navacrono, captain of the Grey Deer Magical Knight Squad. What can your magic do apart from what you just stated? Can you kill devils with it? Can it make you fly? Can you heal other things apart from humans? If your grimoire is not on you, where is it? His barrage of questions were stopped when his mouth was covered by red hair that seemed to smell of the forest, and it would have been a nice experience if not for even more hair slowly starting to wind around his neck. I'm Kaki, please stop asking me pointless questions, as they will not make this coming procedure any quicker, and if you can stop yourself don't worry for I will. Came the sinister response of the confused and annoyed now named Kaki. I told you before, Julius, that your mouth would get you killed one day. Maybe it's today. I think I'll raise a glass to the continued glory of feminine justice. And fury came the amused thought of the Wizarding King. Well, Kaki, before you kill my protege, let's heal the queen first, and then you can decide if you want to kill him or not, she stated, all the while getting a betrayed look from the captain of the Grey Deer. Great, now that the introductions are over, can you please tell me how we are going to get to see the queen? You are correct in your assumptions that I have very little control over the royal wizarding guards, and that even if I could override them, it would cause tension between not only the king and myself, but also by extension House Kier and House Silva. They are stretching the truth a bit in the location of the queen, as her current location is not entirely in the king's palace. She was once being treated in the royal wing, but after the numerous attempts and failure she was moved to a more secluded part of the palace for her own dignity and privacy, His Highness told us. The part of the palace that it is in, while under the protection of the royal guards, is situated in my own part, and therefore giving me final say on what happens when, let's say, someone wants admission. Okay, but what if the king has informed all the royal guards, including the ones in your part of the palace, to deny me access to the queen? How will you get me by that kind of check? You could get in another way while we go through the front door. Once in the tower you are technically in the Wizarding King's palace, and the queen's room, and the only ones that can remove you would be either Isabelle or the queen. Not even the royal knight can stop you once the queen accepts your presence, as she would acknowledge she is not in danger to them. Came a quick response from Julius. He now had a keen look in his eye, as he integrated himself into the conversation for the sake of his friend, showing a cunningness and slyness that sparked a moment of approval from Kaki. That is not actually a bad idea, and it would mean I wouldn't have to interact with them either, which is just beneficial, as at the moment I don't think I could hold back, said Kaki, relieved at the thought. Half an hour later Kaki stood in front of a tower that rose in the air, while thinking on how she was going to get up there. Who was she kidding? Time to pull some inspiration from some of her siblings, and make an entrance. She reached down to her pocket, and took off the glass container that contained Naruto's, and smiled, happy that they were near the final stage of the plan, and that it had worked out. Meeting both the Wizarding King and her protege gave her some confidence in the fact that at least there would still be a county to let when Naruto came of age, as if it was just a king, then she would have no confidence whatsoever. She put her hands together and made a seal sign, and casted a camouflage technique on herself, and began to make her way up the tower, towards the balcony that she had been told was the entrance to the queen's sick room. At the current time in the queen's room, Catherine stared at the now visible woman with 9 tails that was slowly walking into her room with strong purposeful steps, her reddish eyes gazing around the room at the furniture that occupied it, and then back to her, and down toward her pregnant stomach. Catherine's hands wrapped around her stomach in a protective manner, as she was still not sure why this person decided to climb her tower to get into her room. She watched, as the now fox woman walked to the drapes that covered the windows, preventing any light from entering, eyes widening a bit when she started to throw them back, and open the windows. She proceeded to do this step at each, and every point where the drapes were drawn. And by the time she was finished all the windows were open, and the room for the first time since she was moved in here was full of light. It's much better there. How you can stand being in such a dark place on this lovely day is beyond me, but it is clear that someone needed to do that weeks ago. Now would you like some water? Came the melodious voice of the woman. There was a great amount of strength and certainty around her, as if she was the one who owned the tower, and the queen was the guest. Oh, I'm Kaki by the way, and I am here to heal you, so be a good patient, and dismiss the guards when they come into the room in a few minutes. I would ask what hour you are, but if you were good I wouldn't be here, would I? Also, she was one of those direct people who had very little manners, or was it pleasant words in her system? Well, at least that meant she wouldn't be bored at least. How are you going to heal me when so many others have failed to do so? And yes, a glass of water would be nice. Thank you, came the slow response of the queen, as she slowly started to lift herself up on the bed, and smooth out her clothes and bed linens, as it wouldn't appear as a mess to her first guest in a few days. Feeling a presence at her left, she turned to see a glass of water being placed on her counter, but not by a hand, as she expected, but by one of the tails that swayed behind the now identified Kaki. Kaki herself had made herself comfortable on one of the plush chairs, and decided to eat an apple from one of the fruit bowls that were in the room, staring at Catherine intently, as if she was able to find out all she could know of the queen from this stare alone. So intense and serious was the stare that Catherine found herself blushing under it, as in her current predicament, she could not imagine it being a good impression. The scrutiny seemed to have finished, as Kaki gave a nod of approval or something that could be reduced as that, as she relaxed a bit, and took a bite out of the apple in her hand. Kaki's paw. Well, at least she's not dead yet, so that's always a plus, was the first thought that went through the mind, as she finished examining the bedridden queen in front of her. She could feel the powerful magic of Isabelle and Julius making its way towards the tower, as was the plan, so knew she only had a few minutes to make a good impression, so as to be allowed to stay when the guards inevitably came into the room. Hopefully she had left a good first impression. Okay, let's see what I'm working here. As she started to take in what she saw, the queen had a very strong magical presence even in her current state. If she was healthy and hale, it would match Isabelle's power, and it wasn't messy or spreading out unchecked like some of the other wizards or nobles she came across. Even in her current state, and with the effect that the curse should have on it, it was still this sharp and defined, flowing through her body in a constant and controlled rush, and every so often a bit would be leached off into the body of the developing child. Her hair was a rustic red, and damp across her forehead, but showed that it had once been a much more vibrant color, while her eyes, while still dim, showed a defiance that shocked Kaki a bit, as it went against her current situation. The queen's hands were clasped around her stomach, so it was obvious what she was trying to protect, even if it was pointless, as anyone or anything that wanted to harm the unborn prince would have to get through her first and foremost. But it did show a level of love and devotion that was appropriate for the woman that was to be Naruto's mother. It also explained the defiant spark in her eyes. Listen, I am here to help you, not hurt either. You are the child. I am many things, but I don't hurt children or babies. Right now you are the only one who knows my true form. I am not a devil, nor am I a demon or human. I am Kaki, the nine-tailed fox, she who can shape the world to her whim, and make the world how she likes. I am using this form, as I find it easier to talk to people, than in my true form, which is about 200-foot tall giant fox with 9 tails. It tends to inspire fear for some reason. You with me so far, causing the queen's eyes to widen, all the while gaining some fear, but also for some strange reason excitement. So, you're a giant female fox in human-sized form. I can deal with that, but what do you want with me? Why heal me? Said the queen, her voice now a lot calmer and clearer now that she had quenched the dryness with water, and the initial fear had given way to curiosity. 2 reasons really. 1, because your husband is an idiot and insulted me, so saving you will spit in his face and be a big fuck you to him and his cronies. 2, because I'm trying to turn over a new leaf, so to say, and you seem like a good place to start. But the main reason is this. As she was saying this, the queen's eyes sharpened more and her lips twitched, the now bright room causing her skin to regain some of the lost color. She placed the container with Naruto's soul onto the counter beside her, and the glowing mist now slightly knocking against the glass, as if sensing what was to come, and wanting to get it over with, as much as she did. The queen's eyes zoomed in on the container with wonder, as she studied it, her green eyes focused in on the golden mist that was trying to escape. Kaki knew she still had some lingering fear to ease them. She had one of her tails pick up the container, and moved it to the queen's beside, so she could inspect it further. She picked it up, and turned it around, as if weighing what it was, and wondering what its purpose was. The queen looked a bit startled when she first picked it up, as the golden haze moved towards one of her hands. Seeing the queen looking at her once more while gently caressing the container with one hand while the other replicated the action automatically with her stomach, she continued. The object you currently hold is known as a soul container, and currently contains the soul of a child called Naruto Uzumaki, who was murdered by his village, and has been given a second chance of life by both the fates, as well as death itself. For reasons I will explain next, I have been chosen to provide him with that like, and you have been chosen to help in that regard, should you so choose. Kaki said, all the while a nervous tone started to filter into her explanation, as she started to tell the queen of Naruto's life, and her part in it. She needed to know this, so she could make a decision on if Kaki could reincarnate Naruto's soul or not. Because, as bad as Kaki is, she would never try to harm a child intentionally in her now correct state of mind, and getting the queen's permission to process was the last hurdle to overcome, and nothing works better to pluck the heartstring than a sob story with a chance of redemption. By the time she had reached the end of her tale, the queen had a few tears in her eyes, but the emotion that was most prevalent was rage and fury. The heat in the room started to build along with the queen's rage, and the fire in the heat got larger. Even with her current condition on top of the curse, it was still a testament to just how powerful the queen was, and how great her anger was. Catherine's paw. How dare they do that? How dare they harm a child? Those filthy ingrate peasants deserve death, and more for their deeds, she raged in her head, as for the first time since being cursed, she started to feel her magic reach out due to her intense emotions. Being raised as a lioness, she was trained to know the importance of not just the pride, but most importantly the young in the pride, and of how they needed to be protected no matter what. After all, lionesses looked after their young together, and treated them all the same. The very fact that there was a group of people out there, even if they were in a different world, and probably all deal meant little to her right now, would harm a child for nothing else but petty revenge, for a slight that not only the child couldn't be blamed for, but was also protecting them from, made it even worse. To do such a horrid thing to a child angered her greatly, and to learn that his own powers caused him even more pain was horrifying, but to then also learn that it had near broke him when he seemed like such a sweet child, from what Kaki explained, not only broke her heart further, but also caused her to be in questioning if she wanted her child to live in such a world. Apparently Kaki sensed her dilemma, as the next thing she knew her head was against the duvet, as a result of being slapped in the back of it with an elongated rat tail. Shame instantly filled her at the thought she had been having. How could she think that after what happened to Naruto? Having doubt is fine, it's natural, but holding on to it after initially dispersing it is not. Just don't have that doubt again or I'll slap you again, came Kaki's voice. She looked at her, and saw that somehow she had conjured a nail file, and was filing her nails all the while looking at her. You do realize you just slapped your queen, right? She responded in a somewhat smug voice. When you are not my queen, I am a law unto myself. Second, I slapped a momentary fool who is no longer around, are they? Came the biting response from the now equally smug Kitsune. For the first time in a long time she laughed a genuine laugh, as she finally found someone who could match her in both ferocity and attitude. Maybe if she survived this, she would have a new sparring partner, and she could drive her husband even more insane. So what you are looking for is a new body to host Naruto's soul in then? She asked, as she gently caressed the soul container, and smiled, as it pulsed a little brighter. Her previous tiredness and fear forgotten at this new turn of events, ideas started to pop into her mind, which was good, as she started to feel the pain of the curse from letting out all that magic, and needed a distraction from it, lest she return to her previously near vegetated state. Correct, and I was traveling around the village on my way to the Vermillion estate when I heard of you, and decided to come here. I tried to come through the front door, but your husband's fool told the guards to throw me out, so I came through the balcony. Makes sense, and thank you for doing that, as the mess you would have created going through the guards would have destroyed their reputation. As if Kaki was as strong as she displayed and boasted about, then the royal guard would have been little more than fodder for the likes of her. It would have left a bad stain on not only them, but the magical knights as a whole, and that would have been disastrous. Anyway, in order to reincarnate Naruto I need a young body, the younger the better, as it makes the merge of the two souls easier. The best option would be, let's say, an unborn boy. Kaki gave her a pointed look, while using one of her tails to lightly brush against her stomach. Her panic started to set in again, as while she sympathized, and felt both anger and sadness for Naruto, the safety of her son stood paramount to all. But before she lashed out or screamed for the guards, she decided to hear out what Kaki had to say, as if she meant her any harm, then there was nothing stopping her over the last few minutes. Thinking further on this, she decided to stay silent while using a dip of her head to indicate to Kaki to continue, while all the while having what magic she had left ready to defend herself in case of provocation. Thank you for letting me continue. As I was saying, Naruto's soul needs a host body to join with. This does not mean that the host body is being taken over, but not that it will hold two souls. What should happen if all goes well, which it will because I won't allow it any other way that I swear on my 9 tails, is that the soul already in the body, and Naruto's will merge together. The original soul will gain new absolute dominance, and can only grow stronger. Some of the traits of the reincarnated soul will pass over, as well as its power, or should I say potential for power. Kaki paused here to take a breath, and to let her absorb some of that new information. So she got it right then. If Naruto's soul was placed in her son's soul would absorb Naruto's, and he would not only get stronger because of it, but the only side effect would be some extra traits carried over from Naruto. And to be honest, from what she heard, he didn't seem to have any bad traits. In fact, if what Kaki said was true, then he came from and acted like his mother's clan, which was basically the Vermillion clan, but in his world, which would not only be a plus, but also might override some of the bad traits that her son might inherit from his disappointment of a father. Her heart started to beat faster at this revelation, as it meant that her son would not only have a chance to live, but also a chance to thrive, and become what a true Vermillion should be. Should you allow me to run a slight technique on you, and I will be able to see how compatible your son's soul would be to Naruto's, that is if you are okay to go through with the merger. The more compatible the souls, the more successful the merger, and the more powerful and potent the merge will be. A truly successful merge will result in a total merge of the souls, with nothing lost due to incompatibility. Here Kaki stopped talking, looking at her with no small amount of hope and pleading, and it made her feel better that Kaki seemed to be just as invested in this merger working as she was. Taking a final look at both Naruto's soul and at her pregnant stomach, she made her decision. Firm and resolute, she looked at Kaki, as she knew there was no going back, and that if she showed any doubt, then Kaki might not listen to her final answer. Third-person POV. It was at that moment that they slammed open to admit a battle-ready group of magical knights, all with their grimoires ready, and hands raised towards the only other occupant in the room. Behind them stood an amused Isabelle, and a very amused Julius who was taking the whole thing as a huge joke, and was, if anything, looking for somewhere to sit and watch the show that was about to begin. Kaki had somehow between the time of Catherine's decision process had changed from her nine-tailed fox hybrid form to her complete human form, so as not to arouse any suspicion. Catherine herself was smirking all over again at the current predicament, and at how only she knew who Kaki truly was, which was fine with her for now. Step back from the queen, and come with us quietly, peasant. Your Majesty, are you okay? Did the vermin hurt you? We opened the windows. It is freezing in here. All these comments and shouts were coming from the guards, as they all started to converge on Kaki, who for now sat completely still, but with her left hand was fingering a tassel on her sword that lay against the chair, as she had taken it off to sit down. Her eyes started gleaming, and the most powerful wizards in the room started to feel the energy she was gathering, and their eyes went wide, as the amount being gathered was immense. Knowing that if this didn't stop now, they would be cleaning the royal guard off the wall, Catherine finally spoke up in a strong and demanding voice that commanded obedience from all present bar one. Hold yourselves. She roared from her spot on the bed, making all the knights jump who have never heard the queen's voice rise so high. Kaki is here under my protection, and has been summoned by the Wizarding King to heal me of my afflictions, Catherine stated in a voice that just asked for someone to question her. But you Grace the King has ordered she be. Are you in the royal palace? No, you are in the Wizarding Palace, and therefore his orders have no bearing here, and mine take precedence, as you are under my control here, understand? Only the Wizarding King Isabelle herself can overrule me here, she roared back, reminding all who they were truly speaking to. Here, and now she was not just the Queen of Clover. Here, and now she was Isabelle Vermillion, the great lioness of Clover, whose strength had caused two devils to retreat from it. When the knights turned to the Isabelle expecting her to hold up the king's decision, they were shocked when she raised her hand stating, "Well, I can overrule her. It would be not only pointless, but also place her life in danger. As from what the queen has stated, Kaki is here to heal her, so she means no harm. But sir, the king has ordered me to do everything within my power to heal his wife, and I would think this is well in my power to decide. For, as the queen stated, Kaki is in my tower, and here my word is final, understood?" Now also becoming annoyed at being questioned in her own home, she also started to let off some of her mana, as a warning to the gathered knights. It also helped that Julius also took it as his cue, and followed suit, causing the tower to start shaking under such tremendous magical pressure. The knights, who were now brought down to their knees in such a display, finally understood that they were out of the league here, and to question their superior's decision further would be bad for their health. So they decided to beat a hasty retreat back to their position, bar the ones that were stationed at the queen's own doors, who took a position once more at the doors, but this time inside them, so as to keep a safe eye on their charge, as they still had a job to do. Turning back around to face Kaki, Catherine smiled and let out a sigh of relief as she saw that she had removed her hand from the sword, and that Kaki's eyes had returned to their normal coloring and were no longer glowing. Catherine's own eyes had gained some of their coloring back, and her energy that was once nearly all gone seemed to be gaining a new spark of life for now. She was excited for what was to come, as not only might she be cured, but her son would be safe, and if all went right would become even more powerful before he is even born. So Kaki has explained to me what procedure needs to be done to heal me and remove the curse. She has reassured me that there will be no real side effects, and that if all goes right my son will be alright and safe in the end, she stated, while giving everyone in the room a chilling gaze, as she once again challenged them to challenge her. "What's in the glass container?" questioned Isabelle, as she took a step forwards towards it to inspect it. Thought Julius was there in a flash, and was reaching out to it like a sweet-toothed child would to a new candy, the queen making it clear quite clearly that it was not to be touched or removed from the possession, by placing it on her lap with both hands clutching it, and a pointed look accompanying it. It's purified mana that will be pushed into the queen's body to protect the unborn child from any harm, as I remove the illness, and prevent the curse from trying to relocate itself on the bait, Kaki answered, as if it was the most obvious answer, daring them to call her a liar. She has sworn to me that anything and everything she does is to cure me, so let's get this over with. I'm sick of my bed, as it is. Catherine was impatient, and her statement made that clear, as she'd been in the bed for too long without being able to spar with anyone, and couldn't wait to clash with Kaki when this was all over. Kaki nodded swiftly, as she too was impatient to see this done, and any other words would be pointless now, as this procedure was going forwards, whether the others wanted or not, as the only person whose opinion really mattered here had just given her the go-ahead to proceed. She approached the queen, and rolled back the blankets that hid her sickly body underneath them, revealing a body that was too tiny for the personality it belonged to, shivering slightly, as it was exposed to the elements of the room. The queen's breath had quickened, and everyone else in the room stood on edge ready to intervene if anything went wrong, be it malicious or benign. Kaki first started off with a set of hand seals, and then placed her hand on the womb of the queen, and started humming slightly, as she waited for the results of her technique. The response was in the form of a golden light that showed from the womb, the result bringing a smile to Kaki's usually stern face, as she gave a slight nod to the queen to indicate that they could proceed with the next bit. Okay, so the womb is healthy, as is the little prince. None of the taint from either the illness or the curse has reached it. Please hand me the energy cube, she stated, as she held her hand out to Catherine for the soul container. Her response had the result of bringing a wave of relief to the room's occupants, as well a wave of hope, as they realized that maybe she would be able to do what she said she could, and save their queen and prince. Catherine handed her the soul cube, and she once more started an even longer string of signs for a much more complex technique. The soul in the cube started glowing brighter and brighter, until it blinded all within the room with its now blinking light. When the eyes of all within the room finally returned to normal, they saw that the golden mist was gone from the container, and when Kaki once again checked the queen's womb, a much stronger golden light was shown from it, much to the joy of those in the room who knew what it meant for the two souls. Congratulations, my little Naruto, welcome to your new life, best of luck, both of them thought. Now that the prince is safe and healthy, I will proceed to look after the queen. This will be a much faster procedure, hopefully, Kaki said, as she moved her hands to the position on the queen's body, from where she felt the strength of the curse radiate from. Kaki could feel the ill intent of the curse from where her hands were, and was annoyed that it seemed to be more powerful than she had initially accounted for. She might need to push in more of her chakra than she had initially calculated. Well, no matter, it would not stop her either way, as it was a minor roadblock to her plans, and could be easily removed with some extra power, like nearly all roadblocks. Focusing on the curse was paramount right now, but also making sure to have her chakra spread out throughout the body, and making sure some of it went to the womb so as to absorb her chakra into the unborn prince, and further strengthen both the soul and the body. She first started to feel the curse resisting in the first few minutes of the procedure, and in response she snarled, pushing more of her energy into the queen, causing a red glow to be given off from her hands. The devil that had casted the curse was powerful, one of the most powerful devils in the underworld, and to anyone else, it would be nearly if not totally impossible to remove the curse. But Kaki is not your average being, she is the most powerful of her siblings. She held half of the total power of the Jubi, and had an age to master it in all forms, so in the end the curse had as much of a chance of holding out as a snowball did when facing the Sun Nun. But the great scream that scared everyone bar Kaki in the room, causing them to jump, a black and purple mark appeared to cover Catherine before it started to lose its form, and then shattered before their eyes. It disappeared along with Catherine's screams. But the hard work now done, Kaki started the process of purging the queen of her illness, and rejuvenating her body with new energy, which was easy, as the queen's soul would convert any non-standard energy entering her body to the next most acceptable energy of that type. So in this case, any chakra pushed into the body would result in it being converted into mana, and would in turn start to refill the queen's long-depleted reserves. Slowly, but surely, the queen's pale skin started to regain its color before everyone's eyes, going from a pale white to a sick green, and then settling on a near cream color that was close to the original skin color of the queen. Her eyes that were dull green, unfocused and dimmed, seemed to reignite before their own eyes, as they went from a pale sickly green to a dark forest green, and finally settled on the original light forest green, once again shining bright, not with power that is, but that would come later, as she regained her lost power. Her hair had returned to its vibrant red color, and was now regained its luster, once again spilling down to her shoulder, and beyond. The once withered and stretched skin was now young and shiny, and fitting to its own body like a snug glove once again. The most non-physical change was that the magic that was near non-existent due to the constant drain it had experienced due to the curse and illness was starting to grow again, and to those who could sense mana, they could feel that it was as potent as ever. Tears started to fill the eyes of those in the room, as the queen who was once near death, who all others had given up on and had written off, who had been secluded to a bed so as to wither and die in comfort, was now being reborn in front of their eyes, and with her rebirth came the hope for their kingdom. All eyes were still on the queen in shock and reverence at the changes she was still undergoing, but Catherine's eyes were on Kaki, who looked to be nearing the end of her treatment. She smiled at her, not sure of what to say to her for giving her and her unborn child a new lease of life. She feared it would give way to crying, and she needed to be strong in front of her new friend and savior, not that she ever doubted her, it's just that the results were far greater than she had thought they would be. She could not express her thanks and gratitude or love for what was done for her enough to Kaki, but she would make sure that she came as close as possible to it when she was not near tears. She felt the new life that flowed through her and her child, or is it children now? Yes, even if Naruto was not originally her child, he was now part of her and her son, so by process of elimination, he was now her child as well, and she would trounce anyone who questioned that. But if their souls have been combined, then they were one being, as of now. She looked towards the guards to order them to get the king, and then she felt the wetness between. Well shit. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.